Guided Reading Lesson 13. Wonderstruck. I am reading this book to my Year 5 class with permission from Scholastic. So this is where we left Rose. Can you remember how you thought she was feeling in this moment? Can you also remember what happened? Hopefully you can remember that she was asked to leave, we can assume, by the guards after she placed a note on one of the items in the museum. So we're going to begin this lesson with Ben's story. The bright white flash blinded Ben for a second. He shuddered, remembering the lightning. When his eyes adjusted, Jamie was smiling his crooked smile at him, holding the photograph he'd just snapped, a grey square with a white border which had slid out from a thin slot in the front of the camera. Ben knew it would develop by itself in the next few minutes. But Jamie shoved it in his pocket before the image was done. "Why did you do it?" Jamie wrote in his notebook. "Do what?" Jamie mimed running away by moving two of his fingers like little legs. Ben didn't know how to answer. He just knelt down and returned the museum box to his suitcase. Jamie motioned with his hand and Ben knew he was supposed to follow him. He didn't want to leave the walls, but he was exhausted and didn't know what else to do. He wished he could just sleep. They walked through long hallways and up staircases until they came to a door that read, "Keep out." Jamie pulled a set of keys from his pocket, shook them happily in front of Ben's face and quickly opened the door. Ben stared into the dim light on the other side of the door, afraid for a moment to enter. Jamie must have seen Ben hesitate because he took him by the arm and the two boys slipped inside. Dirty plastic tarps covered the windows, so the light was dusty and grey. The room was filled with boxes and all old books which lined the shelves all the way to the ceiling. Paper spilled out everywhere and water leaked down a wall. A pile of furniture was jumbled together in a far corner. Everything had a thick layer of dust. Ben looked around and said, "What is this place?" Jamie wrote, "My secret room." "No. What was this place?" Jamie shrugged. "Storage." Ben studied the towering piles of boxes and papers. It reminded him of the mouldy archive room at his mum's library, with its shelves of ancient, non-circulating newspapers and magazines. Jamie pulled one of the boxes off the shelves and removed a fur blanket. The tag on the back identified it as an object from a caveman display in 1947. He shook it out. With his foot, Jamie cleared away the dust and dirt from an area of the floor towards the back of the room. Beneath the grime was a checkerboard pattern. Although most of the paint had faded, Ben was tired, but he was sure he'd seen the pattern before. Maybe it was in the bus station or somewhere else in the museum. Jamie laid the caveman blanket on the ground, removed a flashlight from another box, handed it to Ben, and the two boys sat down. The blanket smelled a little musty, but it was soft and comfortable. Jamie reached into his knapsack again and pulled out a sandwich. He handed half to Ben, who ate it quickly, even though it was tuna fish, which he didn't like very much. "Thanks," he said between bites. Ben felt a little better after eating, but he still just wanted to sleep. Maybe he could rest here for a while, on the musty fur, until his head cleared and he could figure out what to do next. But before he could ask, though, Jamie lifted his right hand and made it into a fist. He then straightened his fingers and crossed his thumb over his palm. He was repeating the shapes he'd made earlier. Next he made his hand into the shape of a crescent moon. Then he touched all the fingers to his thumb, except for his index finger, which he pointed straight up. Jamie motioned for Ben to repeat all the shapes as he mapped the corresponding letter. Too tired to protest, Ben started copying the motions as Jamie continued. E, F, G, H. Ben liked the feeling of the shapes on his hand, and he woke up a bit. Some letters were easy, like C and L and O and Z, because they looked just like the written letters, but others were harder to remember, like P, H and F. They went through the alphabet a few times. Then Jamie reached under a nearby shelf, pulled out a shoebox filled with Polaroids and slid it towards Ben. Ben understood that he wanted him to look at the photographs. He flipped through and saw images of dinosaur skeletons, dozens of views of the floating blue whale, and close-up of bison, lizards, gorillas, mountain goats, elk, coyotes, and the wolf in their dioramas. Another section in the box had photos of museum visitors. There were endless studies of hairstyles, glasses and clothes. One of the photos was the old woman they'd seen earlier at the wolf diorama. "I told you, she's here all the time. Once I followed her and she walked up to the keep out sign on this room and ran her hand across it. I'd never noticed the door before. My dad works here, so I stole a set of keys from the office. and let myself in. Jamie then showed Ben a picture of a woman with short blonde hair and big gold glasses. He mouthed the words, "My mum." She was standing next to a tree with a swing set nearby. "She works late," Jamie wrote. "I come home on the bus after school. I have my own house key. I spend the afternoons by myself. We live upstate." Ben didn't know what that meant, but it sounded far away. "You don't live in New York City?" he asked. Jamie shook his head and flipped through the photos until he found a picture of a man wearing a crooked bow, a tie and a hat. Walking towards the camera, he mouthed the words, "My father." Instinctively, Ben touched the locket beneath his shirt. "He lives here," Jamie wrote. "I see him on holidays and weekends, and I live with him during the summer." Jamie reached into his pocket and pulled out the picture he'd taken of Ben. He slipped it into the box before pushing it back under the shelf. Jamie pointed to Ben's suitcase and gestured for him to open it. Ben didn't want to, but Jamie's crooked smile convinced him it'd be okay. Once he did, Jamie reached for the museum box. It was clear that he wanted to see what was inside. Ben hesitated again, but Jamie urged him to unlock the lock. Everything was in its place. The 2 gravestones, his baby tooth, the little plastic game piece, the fossil, the bird skull and the seashell turtle. Ben picked up each object and told Jamie a little bit about them. Unlike Billy, Jamie didn't tease him. He seemed to love hearing about them. He asked questions, put out his hand so he could touch all the items himself. Ben watched as Jamie held the objects, and for some reason it made him happy. Only his mum had ever shown this much interest in his collection. When they'd looked at everything, Jamie zipped up his green knapsack and slung it over his shoulder. He pointed to himself and towards the door. "It's getting late, I have to go. I'll be back tomorrow," he wrote. "You sleep here, it's safe. Toilet's down the hall. Look out for the night watchman." Jamie waved from the door and left. Ben was exhausted and relieved to have a safe place to stay for the night. As he put the museum box back in his suitcase, he thought about Jamie taking such delicate care of the bird skull and seashell turtle and the stromalite. He lay down on the fur and drew his knees up to his chest, but as soon as he closed his eyes, his thoughts turned home. He was sure the people in the Dulles Children's Hospital had called his family when they found him missing. Were the police going to track him down here to New York City? At least Robbie was probably happy to have his room to himself for a while. Ben imagined his mum sitting next to him, lifting his chin so he was looking up into her eyes. He waited for her to tell him what to do, to give him the perfect piece of advice. She'd always liked him to figure things out for himself, though, and when he imagined her speaking, the only thing she said was, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars." Then his mum disappeared, and he couldn't think of anything else to do except go back home. Ben's head buzzed and his skin prickled. He turned on the flashlight and opened the locket. He stared into Daniel's face. Maybe he had been completely wrong from the start. Maybe this wasn't his father at all. Ben had been foolish to come all this way without more information. "Who are you?" he asked the picture. There was no answer. He wished he could stay long enough to find out why the wolves were here, but the guilt over worrying his family expanded his chest, and he knew he had to return to Minnesota. So we return to Rose's story. Ben was running through the snow again. The wind stung his face and he could barely breathe, but something felt different. There were no sounds of galloping footsteps, no howling, no crunching snow. Everything was silent, so he couldn't tell where the wolves were. Had they disappeared, or were they right at his heels, about to pounce? Afraid to look back, he kept running until he woke up in a cold sweat, out of breath, with the caveman blanket wrapped around his legs. Jamie didn't come back the next morning, and Ben didn't want to leave without thanking him and saying goodbye. Besides, he needed Jamie's help to call his aunt and uncle. He was hungry, so he got up, changed his shirt, and headed into the museum, leaving the door unlocked. He used the bathroom and then went back to the cafe and finished the remains of another sandwich, a fruit cup, and some juice he found sitting on a deserted table. He made his way back to the wolf diorama and stared into the glass eye of the running wolves. Ben noticed a sign mounted to the wall near the diorama that he hadn't read yesterday. Environment of the Wolf Group, Gunflint, Minnesota. This typical December winter scene is placed at the margin of Gunflint Lake. Across the lake lies Ontario. Gunflint Lake forms part of the old fur trading route, extending westward from Lake Superior to Rainy Lake, which was originally selected to give the minimum number of portages. The time is midnight. The temperatures had fallen well below zero. The curtain, type of northern lights, blazes upwards from the horizon. Constellations, Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, and Ursa Minor, the Little Dipper, can be recognised. Ben looked at the night sky painted on the curved wall at the back of the diorama. There it was, the Big Dipper, and in the tail of the Little Dipper, Ben could clearly see the North Star, but he never felt more lost in his life. So if you notice, Rose has a white almost shadow around her, and so does the man here. Do you think there's a link between them? Who do you think this man might be?